So some of the stuff that I'm going to say is already in a different video, which is in my animations page on my website. But the things that I will go over is mostly the game making of it. So Tethered was my capstone project, although I don't think I treated it as much. It was created with 5 people in 5 months, with me as the artist, meaning I had to do animations, 3D modeling, etc., etc. And then we had 2 programmers and 2 game designers. Although game designing generally came from everybody, but the harder points came from the actual game designers. When we first started actually figuring out what we wanted to do, it was very, very difficult. Until we thought of an idea where the game would play as you were this entity, where you would get this one shot off of a kind of a sonar thing to see what's around you, and then you'd have to try and dodge or attack or something of that matter in order to survive. At which, from that idea, we expanded and made Tethered to what it is today, where you are this smoky boy, as I like to call it, or Subject 17. What you do is you tether yourself. Hey, that's the title of the game. You tether yourself from person to person, trying to survive and escape the facility. Now, unfortunately, you can't see too much, as you're just a smoke. That's all you are. So you kind of send out this sonar kind of thing, like I stated earlier, to see what's around you. So early on, when we first started making the game, we had to figure out how are we going to create this effect of the sonar, show what are things for like a split second. Luckily, our teacher had this material already that he could adjust to help make this happen. Now, I will say though that this material, well, I shouldn't say material, it's a shader, was very, very difficult, as it held us up for the first 5 months of creating the game. The main thing being of how did we want the sonar to go out? Do we want it to just be one single line of seeing stuff go out, or do we want a full circle out and then slowly close back in? But the other issue with the shader was that, for whatever reason, whenever I started texturing my models and stuff and started actually adding things onto the said models along with the shader, they didn't look right for whatever reason. They were like slightly darker, and they had like patches on them or something. And it wasn't until a month and a half in, I believe, that I had asked my teacher about it, and he looked back into the original shader and found out he had a normal map built into the shader itself that kind of screwed with everything a bit, with how the textures worked and all that. So after that, work was actually getting done. So a lot of the work that I did was the animations, 3D modeling, and some prop stuff. At which, directly at the beginning, I created quick room assets like ladders, boxes, chairs, and tables and stuff to help map out the room a bit more, so we have an understanding of where we want our enemies to be, what paths the player can take, etc., etc. Directly after that, I created the guard asset. I must admit it's not very good, because during this time when I made this, it was the first time in like forever that I had rigged or actually textured something in a good long while. So it didn't come out very well. I had to do a lot of backtracking and stuff, and making sure it looked right. And which partially was part of I thought it was part of my issue, an issue from me of not porting stuff right, but it ended up just being an issue with the shader itself. So then, with having the guard, the room asset done, I started tried to create a rabbit. However, at the time, I wasn't very good with 3D modeling. Although I must say right now I am working on my own bunny, but I ended up having to get a rabbit from somewhere else, and then adjust it a little bit, at which I made it have less polygons, as well as fully actually have it rigged. My idea behind the rabbit was to actually have it move around and stuff, but I never got around to that part, as we were kind of, like I said, we were very behind on a couple of other things. Next was making some props to put on the table, like beakers, computers, technological things of that matter, to make the room feel nice. But as I was doing this, I had second thoughts. Because initially, the idea was to have the whole thing black and white. Because, you're this enigma. You don't really see anything, so whenever you send out the radar, everything would be seen as a black and white kind of deal. But I had second thoughts, as I felt this was boring, gray, and whatnot. So at one point, I had recreated our first room with colors and stuff, and it looked nice. But the rest of the team members thought it just wouldn't work. So we ended up going back to the black and white palette. So after that first half, with the 3 months in, we had mostly figured out how we wanted our game going. So now the idea by the end of this, we wanted a tutorial level, and then 2, maybe 3 more levels if we can help it by the end. So work was pushed for me to work on intro stuff. This included creating props for the intro, animations, though I must admit some of the animation work I did wasn't very good. So I created small animations for the giant camera that was on that long arm, as well as animations for the scientists that I later created to fiddle around on the control panel that's up there, and then along with the claw that came down, pick up the cage, and take it out of the room. Although I must admit, now thinking about it, where was the claw going to go? Because the claw didn't really go, there was no door or whatever to where the claw was going. Plus the little animation at the end, if you notice it, of the guy hitting the other guy for screwing things up. So from there, I had created little idle animations for the scientists. They were going to be positions at which wouldn't move. The main goal of the guards was moving around. Scientists, we were going to leave as sitting at tables and whatnot, doing their own thing. So I created quick animations for them, as well as using some of the props I've already created to make them more interesting. Although to say that you will be able to see this actual stuff is kind of hard to say. After everything had been done and said, was this a good game? Yes and no. For me, it was a new experience because I hadn't worked in a way like this. And by this, I mean like with a team of 5 people. Because with Spittins, I ended up going at my own for the most part. But it was a new ordeal, especially since I ended up relearning texturing, rigging models, and 3D modeling in general. As well, learning stuff for animating. So overall, it was a good experience and a bad experience. It's not a good game, but a lot was learned after creating it, which in my book, is good.